Since 1887, the Stonington Free Library has been a center for knowledge, ideas, creativity, and entertainment. It is a comfortable and welcoming community space for the town of Stonington, Connecticut, where all ages can explore, discover, gather, and learn within a building of distinctive and unique architecture. This video program is an evolution to expand the offerings of the library to share directly in your home or organization. Welcome to the Thoughtful Thursdays speaker series, made available to you by the Stonington Free Library.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Ken Knott. I'm on the program committee for the library. Wow.
Yeah. Come over here. It's okay.
One way or the other. Thank you all for coming to tonight's Thoughtful Thursdays given by the Stonington Public Library. Tonight with the Beginner's Guide to Genealogy, with ideas on where to start planning and organizing your information. Our speaker, Linda Christensen, is a retired teacher, president of the Preston Historical Society, and currently working towards certification as a genealogist. Linda has pursued information about her Eastern and Western ancestors, as well as her husband's Colonial and Dutch heritage. She's going to look at how to get started in genealogy, and especially how to stay organized. We all can know how to stay organized.
That's
so
right.
Look forward to that. So on behalf of our chairperson, Susan Martin, please give a warm Stonington welcome to Linda Christensen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ken. Everybody's been so nice here. I don't want to leave, so it's going to be a long night, guys. Just before we even get started, how many of you have never done genealogy, just kind of thought this would be a nice thing to come to? Oh, good. Okay, good. Because this is for you. It's the overwhelming the feeling that people get when they think, oh my gosh, I've got that suitcase full of papers from Grandma and Grandpa that every time I look at, I kind of get a knot in my stomach because I know I should do something with it, but I'm afraid to. I don't know what to do with it. So tonight we're going to look at maybe what to do with it and where to go, and to kind of allay your fears, to at least get started. I'm just going to share. Oh, here we go. See? It's me. I don't know what it, oh, there it goes. All right. I want to share this quote. We all grow up with the weight of history on us. Our ancestors dwell in the attics of our brains as they do in the spiraling chains of knowledge hidden in every cell of our bodies. By Shirley Abbott. Nowadays, you're hearing a lot about DNA, those kinds of things, but our ancestors really dwell up here before we start going for blood tests and finding, where we, quote, really come from. We've all got an interest. No, I shouldn't say that. There are a lot of people who don't, and I just don't understand it. Why not? But it's always been something that's interested me. Goals for today. Why do genealogy? Where do I start? What do I do with the information I accumulate? And where can I search locally and beyond? Many of us have that beginning information and then don't know what to do with it or where to go with it. Why are we doing this? I want to tell you that the reason I started out was my daughter was in 7th grade and was given a project to do, some genealogy a couple of generations back. And of course, went to me and I went to my mother. And now my mother and I are hooked for life. My daughter's kind of interested, but now my mom and I are totally hooked for life. The other thing was when we went to visit my husband when we were first dating. He lived in Michigan, and his aunt brought out this blue sheet of paper. And on it is a family record connecting his family to someone on the Mayflower. Well, of course, you know, being a history teacher, etc., I was like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. But I needed to prove it. And that's where the bottom line is, okay? This looked really nice and it was really exciting, but I needed to prove it. And I did, which is kind of cool. So again, why am I searching and what are you searching for? There's got to be a reason that you start. I wanted to verify my husband's link to the Mayflower, and I'm also interested in the family migration from Massachusetts to Michigan. It's one of the things that they went from Plymouth Colony to upstate Massachusetts, to Vermont, to upstate New York, and finally ended up in Michigan. Why? Why'd they move? And they stayed in those places for generations, and then they moved on. Why were they going west? So, and I really haven't been able to, other than in a few places, been able to find out why. But an interesting thing to research. When you are starting genealogy, you don't start with grandma, you start with yourself. Gather your important documents. Birth and marriage certificates, military, educational records, citizenship papers if you have any, diplomas, newspaper clippings, photos, anything you can find that you think is relevant about your life, and of course your spouse. If you've got old journals or diaries, ooh, wow. Also, and there are, in fact, I think I might have a couple of books that show you, like as a grandparent, write down your memories of growing up. These are very interesting things, maybe not to you right now, but to your grandchildren and great-grandchildren later on. Places you've lived. Talk about growing up, who your best friends were, what kinds of games did you play. I'm sure yours are very different than what your grandchildren or children are playing now. What was your home and your hometown like? Especially if you lived in Stonington. How cool is that? Stories about your parents and your grandparents. What do you remember about your parents and grandparents? All important. Always start with yourself. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but one of the things I always tell people to do before they get started going to the courthouse is to interview as many people as you can. The older the better, for obvious reasons. Record it digitally, don't videotape it. Nothing's more boring than watching a person sit there for an hour and a half. But take notes. Start with obviously your older relatives. Come in with a list of questions. Broad, kind of vague questions, starting with childhood. But make sure you get their full name at birth, their middle name, maiden name, especially date of birth and where they were born exactly. Do the same kind of thing you would have done as you wrote down your memories, if you can. Early childhood, adult life. One way, especially with people, my mom just turned 90. If you ask her about the hurricane of 38, she can talk for an hour. Really want to get them involved and totally interesting to my grandkids. They never heard about a big hurricane like that. And gosh, didn't you hear about it on the radio? Heck no. End with, what's some advice for younger children? Those are always interesting things to write down and to talk about later. And not just grandparents, aunts, uncles, anyone you can think of. This is an ancestral chart, a pedigree chart. I've included one in your paperwork, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to, this is pretty self-explanatory. You're going to start with yourself and your spouse. This is a paper trail for yourself. But it's a great way to kind of get into things and give you an idea of where you're going. When you record information, just like on that sheet that I just showed you, you want to do it consistently. Don't do Sousa, John Philip. Don't do, make sure whatever you do it the same way. I am suggesting doing it this way because genealogically that's how people look at information, and that's how you will be looking at it later. Why do I put the surname in capital letters? Is so I can tie it together and I can see it quickly. It stands out. When I do my line, like my straight line going back from me, my father, my grandfather, that straight line, I capitalize everything. And that way I've got it right in front of me. Always use military style dates. Day, month, year. The month being written out in 3 letters. Write names of places from smallest to the largest, if you can find it. Often, sometimes it's hard to find that county. Sometimes it's different. I taught in Voluntown for a while. Voluntown was in Windham County, then it was in New London. So it makes a big difference. Was it Windham County then or New London County? Always starting from the smallest to the largest. By the way, if you have any questions, I don't mind answering. Yeah, sure.
What is the town change name?
Well, that's a really good question, but depending on when that record, let's suppose it's a birth record, okay? You've got that information. That's the name you're going to put down. Now, somewhere you might want to write a note about it changing, and maybe it did when they got married, and that would certainly be something you'd want to keep a special note about, but that's a really good question. But what was it when that event took place?
But the other part of it is where the records are.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. That's another problem totally. But we'll come to that in a minute. I collect everything digitally. And I have to say, I do have, look at this is just one small piece of collection. But for the most part, everything I have in there, I have digitally on my computer, on flash drives, on CDs, whatever, and I keep trying to update them. But nowadays, you've got to, or you're going to have a room full of stuff. And people don't want you to keep all their stuff, So you want to make sure you scan a photograph. Aunt Lucy's probably going to let you take her picture and scan it rather than take her picture and keep it. So you've got it, and it doesn't matter to you whether you have the original. Well, if it does, then that's another problem, totally. So photographers scan pictures, documents, all of those records. Anything you can find. If you want to, in here I've got some real documents, but for the most part I've scanned mostly everything. Family heirlooms, Bibles. What's important about a Bible, if it's an old Bible, is the front pages. You don't necessarily have to take the whole Bible. If you're lucky enough to have one, my goodness, scan that at the beginning. And nowadays with the cameras, even using your phone, take great pictures and just put them into, or make a copy however you want. But there's no reason to keep all of that stuff. Okay. This is so important, and I cannot stress enough. When I first started doing genealogy, I was like, oh, I got all this information, and yeah, and I wrote it all down in my ancestry chart. And guess what? Today, I'm going back trying to figure out where the heck did I get that information, because I didn't source it. Where did I get that? Did somebody tell it to me? Did I, read it somewhere? In some cases, I have no idea. And it's okay if you write down that someone told you it, but who told it to you? Aunt Mabel, who hates everybody else in the family, or you know, your grandmother, or whatever. I think it makes a difference that you know and the other members of your family know where you got that information. So take the time to source it. You are building a case to prove reliability of your information. So you're a detective, really. Just think of a detective building up a case. You don't want to just get one birth certificate and say that's it. You'd like to see it in other areas too, about when someone was born. The more sources you have that prove a fact, the better. Start organizing. Now in the beginning, that was me. In fact, that is my file cabinet, or one of them. And I started out like that, but it got so confusing because I didn't know, you know, whose name is first, and then what do I do for the rest of the members of the family? Do they get another file? I went from filing systems, which I found difficult, to a binder system where at least, like I started out with a Christensen binder for my husband's family, then a Lefrancois binder for my family, then a Rosal binder for my mother's family, and a vote, you know, for his other side of the family. So things, as they got more bulky, I started breaking off and keeping that information in really nice, well, just like this, in the plastic envelopes here that are keep very well and are easy to put in and out. I don't put holes in papers, I put everything in here. So, binders, filing system, great way to begin if you're just starting. What I eventually did was I went to a genealogy software. I love Family Tree Maker. There's other ones, and I've written them in your handout. Legacy, I think, is another one. There's several new ones. Roots Magic is another one. I've always used Family Tree Maker. They update it every 2 or 3 years, and I found it to be extremely helpful. But it costs to start, okay? So you've got to buy the software. Online tree builder. Family Search is an online source that goes through the LDS, the Mormon Church, and they do, everything's free on Family Search. They do have a family tree builder that you can put your information in, and then you can download it yourself, etc. I liked Family Tree Maker because it's a little more modern. It's a lot more moderner. And also, Family Tree Maker attaches to Ancestry or other types of search engines that I can use. So, but online tree builder is fine through Family Search. What you want to do is work backwards from what you know. You know you. You know your parents. You're going from the present back another generation. One generation at a time. Don't forget about brothers and sisters, etc., aunts and uncles. This really keeps you focused. Don't sit down one day and decide you're going to go all the way to Charlemagne or something, you know. I've had people come to me, I'm going to go to Charlemagne. You don't just need people, you need dates and places. And again, you need a good source. Let me catch up to myself. Oh, one of the things that this reminded me of, and especially being in a wonderful place like Stonington, is it's important that you know the history of the town you're studying. It really makes a difference. What was happening in that town during the time your grandparents were here? Not just, I mean, you might know American history, but things were happening in your town also. So it's important to do a little bit of background. And it's really very interesting, especially if it's a town you know, I've been doing a lot of research up in Huron, Wayne County, upstate New York. Lovely little village that I've been to several times. neither time was the library open when I got there, but and that's something we'll talk about later. But I've done a lot of online searching for what it was like to live there. Really very, very interesting. So, what's next? You've interviewed, collected, recorded, you've got all this stuff. What do? So you decide what line are you going to work with. I suggest that direct line back from you, your father, that name line, okay, that you can go with. But if you're interested in another line, go for it. What do you want to know? I mean, start out simple. I don't know, looking at that pedigree chart with the information you've recorded, what don't you have? I don't know when my grandmother was born or where. Okay, figure out what you want to know. What are you looking for? If you're looking for a woman, you need her maiden name. That's really important. And I'll tell you what, once you start getting into colonial research, you're going to find that it was Mrs. Ralph, Brown forever. The poor lady never had a real name. Just finding out her first name sometimes is difficult. So you've got to go to find a lot of different documents. Full name, middle name if available. Now if you're really lucky and you have a name like first name, what was grandfather was Comfort Henry, that's great. But if it's, Thomas Brown, no middle name, and his father, and it's Thomas Brown, you don't know, but it might be the fifth or whatever, you're in trouble. You've got some work to do. What you're going to need next is those events. At least if I've got a Thomas Brown and I know when he was born, now I've got something to work with. Where, again, it's important to know the place where a person was born, married, lived, died, whatever. It changes, and as you said, it might change over time, and it might be exactly that same house that, started out, but it might have changed. When? Get at least an approximate time period. Even if you're within the same century, whatever, at least kind of know what you're working with. Okay. Oh, okay. It's important to note the difference between a primary source and a secondary source. Primary is created by an eyewitness of an event. Marriage record, death record, birth certificate, census, family Bible may or may not, military records, naturalization records. Someone had to be there to give them the information. Whatever that date on that particular certificate was, someone gave that eyewitness account. Now, there might be copies of that record in other places, but for the original primary source, that's an eyewitness account. Secondary source based on evidence gathered, such as a book of genealogy information, or anything that a person, like old letters, that you're not sure of, interviews of people. I'll tell you what, I can talk to my aunt and my mom, 93 and 90, about the same event in the household. I'm going to hear two different stories. And so, you've got to take who did you interview, what kind of information was it. So be careful. I try to start locally if I can. Obviously, if you're not from here, that's very difficult. Start locally at your local town hall in Stonington. The library has resources. You're very lucky, that's the New London Library, so there are more county records there. But this is the Woolworth Library right here in Stonington that has a wonderful genealogical section. They're not open all the time. Check their hours. I think it's Wednesday through Saturday. I'm not sure, but they told me to tell you. They're open all year long as opposed to the Palmer House, which isn't open all year long. But she said they are open all year long. Now, if you really get into things, you can go to the Connecticut State Library. Woo! They're wonderful there. But I'd really, when you went there, that's an all-day affair. And you have to have a list of things. What am I looking for exactly? And I would suggest calling even before you went to tell them what you're looking for. A lot of times, the repositories there are in another area, in another warehouse, and they can get them for you. So call and talk to someone before you go to one of these. Okay, let's look at vital records a little bit. Civil records. In most cases, vital records only began after the mid-19th or 20th century. If you're lucky, and I'm not sure about Stonington records in Preston, I have vital records in our town hall back to the 1660s. Wow, huh? I mean, we're really lucky. Connecticut, I hear, has one of the best vital records collections. Our town clerks have been very good. I hope Stonington is the same way, if that's what you're researching. Again, start with yourself and work backwards. And we'll talk a little bit about the different kinds of certificates and what you're going to be able to view and get to. By the way, I'm not sure if your library has it yet. Michaela, maybe you know. I know they have a section called Genealogy Bank, where it's kind of like Ancestry.com that you see on TV with the little green leaf, kind of. Only Genealogy Bank isn't. But I hear you're getting Ancestry Library in the future.
It is, we are questioning that.
Okay, good.
But we do have Genealogy Bank.
Okay,
and
so.
It's available on the front page of our website.
Right,
with your
but.
library card.
But it's nothing like the little green leaf from Ancestry, so I'll tell you that. In most cases, you're not going to get vital records off of online. They just don't come like that. But often, if you write to the county or state where the record should be, they can send you the information about how to request it and how much it costs, probably about $20 a shot. If you're lucky, you might get some friendly genealogists from the area. I belong to a group called Random Acts of Genealogical Kindness, and we do free lookups for people. I'm not going to get them the real thing, but I will go and look and find out if the record is there and what it says, and I can write that to them. So, if I am looking at vital records, don't move, birth certificates. First of all, you should know that you cannot, unless you're looking for your own and can prove that it's you that you're looking for, or perhaps a parent, and I don't know exactly how that works, you can't get a birth certificate or look even in the birth records unless something is over 100 years old. Just the way it is. Because of adoption and all of that. But they do give some really great information because somebody in the family, hopefully the mother at least for a birth certificate, will give the birthplaces of both parents, their ages, their occupations, their address. I was born in Ogden, Utah, and only lived there. My parents were there for a month or so. But I was able to, several years ago, take a road trip and go see the hospital where I was born and where my parents lived at the time. And gosh, that was really cool. I mean, maybe nobody else cares, but I thought it was really neat. Also, it will tell you the number of other children the mother has had, which can be very interesting information. Because I can find out, wait a minute, I only know of 2 uncles. What happened to that other child? So it puts me on the hunt for some of that other information. Sometimes what's there or not there can be the clue to what you're looking for. So those are pretty interesting things. Marriage records, town clerks again. A lot of times if you can't find something at a town clerk, religious churches, they'll have a marriage record. And a lot of times in early colonial times it was both. So I have in vital records in our town hall, it'll say what church it was, who the minister was, and all of that information. And even though the churches are no longer there, I have that information at the town hall, which is pretty cool. So again, after the 1850s, everything, you had to have it. But in Connecticut, we've been pretty lucky, depending on when your town was formed. Now, death certificate, everybody thinks, okay, I'm going to look for grandma. I need to find her birth certificate. Well, guess what? You want to get her death certificate first, because that's the easiest. It's the closest in time to you. Once you have that death certificate, it gives you all of this information, including when they were born, hopefully, depending on and this is an important one, the informant. My uncle gave my grandfather's information, and he had no idea where my grandfather was born, so took a guess. And it turned out it was the same place my grandmother was born that you put down, but it wasn't. That's not where he was born. So, but, so look and see who's the informant. 6 girls in the family. They had to ask my uncle for the information. He had no idea. But again, start with that death certificate. It really, really helps. Also, it will, if the wife is still alive, it'll give you her name, etc. And again, maybe go for a marriage record from there. So the death certificate sometimes is much more important than a birth certificate. Also, a lot of times on the death certificate, because it'll go back and forth, it'll tell you where they're buried. So you can find a stone where there's sometimes more information. Again, evaluate the information. Just because it's on a tombstone doesn't mean it's so. Just because it's in print or online or because grandma told you doesn't make it true. So written oral evidence, again, you need several different pieces to prove. Also, be particularly wary of taking somebody else's genealogy and making it your own. Just because you connect one little piece may not be the piece you should be connecting, especially if you go on Ancestry and find that little green leaf. It may not really be your ancestor. So take it with a grain of salt. I love census records. Have any of you ever gotten to look at any census records? Oh, some of you have. What fun. Now, right now, and actually within the last, 5 or 6 years, the 1940 census came available. Wow, my mom is in the 1940 census, and her whole family is there. Census is taken every 10 years, as you know, I'm sure. But one of the things you should know that it's held up for 72 years. So we can't, I think it'll be 2022 before the 1950 census is available. That makes 72 years, which is a long time to wait for to find my name in the census. 1790 to 1940 censuses are available. How much information they have is a little more interesting. Usually, 1790 to 1840, and a little bit more as you got towards 1840, the census is listed the head of the household, plus the number of others living there. Males, females, free blacks, and slaves. Okay? Now, head of household could be a woman if it was a widow. It could be an older child who took over. So you don't know. You have no idea. There's no ages listed. And there are just these columns. But it's still nice to know that perhaps that family did live in that area. They are listed by towns. In some cases, they're listed by societies. I know in Preston we had the Second Society and the Third Society, meaning a group of people who actually it was a religious society at the time, but they lived in a rural area. Now, beginning in 1850, they started listing all the names, ages, places of birth, occupations. It's really neat to go in. 1870 got a little better, started indicating whether your parents were foreign born or not. 1880 added where the parents were born. As each year got improved, the census, the paper got longer and longer, I guess. Which is why we do it probably on I think, are we doing it online now? I can't remember what we did on the last census, but it was filling in a lot of bubbles, if I remember correctly. There was one census where they asked how many radios were in the house. We'll go on from there, but pretty interesting. Oh, going back to that 1790, at that time, slaves were considered 3/5 of a white. And it's wondered that in many of these places where they asked for number of slaves, did that mean 3/5 of the number of slaves that they had? So, were they playing with those numbers too? We don't quite know. I thought that was pretty interesting. I never really thought about it. No, here we go again. Okay. 1880 was look at the information in the 1880 census. Besides all of what we talked about, married within previous year, month of marriage. So boy, does that help genealogists in 1880. And look at all of these. Sick or temporarily disabled, maimed, crippled, bedridden. All kinds of different, I don't know what was going on then, but lots of disabilities. Education. This is another one that started and stayed for a while. Attended school in the previous year. Ability to read or write English. The value of real estate. Were they wealthy? What's really neat is look around you. Look at the people above and below them on the census. Where were they? I mean, it's hard to figure out whether owning, $3,000 worth of real estate is a lot at that particular time. But when you start looking at other people in their families, it really gives you an idea. Here is when, not necessarily in Connecticut, it starts giving more of a number on the side here where you live, and it'll give you your street. But in Preston, forget it. I mean, it was almost until the 1900s before I was able to locate where people were living. But in a city, maybe like a borough here, where there are definite, the houses are close together, et cetera, and street numbers, they might be right on there. So really interesting. How nice to be able to go back and see that was where my grandfather grew up or whatever. We know that in 1890, and that the federal census was almost totally destroyed by fire. I don't think there are any Connecticut records that were left. Some states, I think New York has a few counties that were left, but almost all of it was gone, which totally blows me away. I can't believe somebody didn't keep a copy, or that the states didn't have something, but it's gone. We know that as the censuses, every 10 years, that they got a little more information. What are they starting to add in 1900 and 1910 because of this huge wave of immigration, the year of immigration, and where they were in the citizenship process? Were they naturalized? Had they filed their papers? A lot of people filed their papers, looked really good, yeah, but then many people never finished. It was a process to get your citizenship. Boy, if you've got naturalization papers, you can go right back. There's a number on them, and you can go to the National Archives. We have ours, the closest one is in Waltham, Massachusetts. There's a wonderful National Archives up there with a great genealogy department. And I'm sure they would be sure to help you, and maybe you could even find those papers, and a lot of times they even had pictures of them on them, which is great. So, if you can with censuses, start with 1940. Again, what do you know? Then you can trace back. You know exactly where they lived then. Hopefully, maybe you're lucky enough and they lived in the same place 10 years before. Oh, another thing, note similar names living nearby. It may be hard for you to trace Tom Brown, but it might be easier to trace Zachariah Brown, his brother that lived right next to him. And if Tom moved, probably Zachariah did too. Zachariah is a pretty common name back then too, but just to see what I mean, notice that families stuck together. So did ethnicities. You know, there was the Polish neighborhood and the French Canadian. Also,
How about intermarriage?
oh my gosh.
Between neighbors.
Yeah.
On the list, and you find next door neighbors that were married to grandfather.
Totally. Well, that's my grandmother lived in the same boarding house as my grandfather, and you know, 5 years before they were married. So, that's a really good point, and that's a great way of finding those families too. Also, if you look on marriage records, look to see who were the witnesses. A lot of times there were brothers or you know, other family members. This is a biggie. Spelling errors. Nowadays, in the old days, we used something called Soundex, which was you gave every sound, had names, had numbers and everything, and you could look for names that way. It was horrible. Nowadays, most of our software has a sounds like kind of area. My husband's family last name is Vogt, V-O-U-G-H-T. Well, I can give you probably 10 different ways of spelling that name, and they're all over the place. So luckily, they've got some odd first names like Lent or Sylvester, or you know, a little bit more than John or whatever. But it's been a real challenge. So you've got to be creative. Don't just say that's their name and that's the way it's going to be. Also, thinking that when they came over on the boat, well, the guy taking the information changed it because he couldn't understand it. In most cases, your family member they wanted an American name. They wanted it to look American and to be American. So they might have changed it themselves. I'm not saying there weren't errors made at Ellis Island, but in most cases it's because the immigrant coming over wanted to be part of what he was coming to, or she. Again, keep track of the source. What census did you take the information from? One thing I like to do is, you can, online, you can find a blank copy of censuses for each year, every 10 years. And you can look and find out, you know, make sure you go down the column and find out, and you could take and do a little kind of chart of your family and have all of that information down. And then you can trace it, you can look at the next census back. Excuse me, at the next census and see how did it change. Is their occupation different? Look at a mill town. I just did a thing on mills in Voluntown, and boy was it fun looking at that early 1900 census and finding all the different jobs from a mill, the doffer and the spinner and you know, all of those different kinds of mill names. So I'm got off the beaten track there, sorry. Some people say, well, where am I going to find that information? Well, of course you can pay the big bucks, like I do, and go on Ancestry.com, or maybe use an Ancestry library if you can. There is a great way, Heritage Quest, that you can do right through your library. That information's in the notes that I gave you, how to get on it. Or you can go to familysearch.org, and you can get the census that way also. You can go in and search by name. You could search by location. But I have to say, like, to go through a town, New London, I mean, you're going through a lot of pages if you don't have a pretty good search engine. But if you're, patient, Heritage Quest is awesome. You can do it at home through Icon, which has been cut back a lot, but this is online and they haven't cut it back. I've given you the directions on how to do it. You need a library card, and you have a barcode or a number on your library card. You need that to get in. I'm going to go to the next one. This is what it looks like now. That other one was an old one. And you can go into the census. You can search books and put in your surname. You can search for Revolutionary War pension papers, etc. Freedmen's Bank. There are about 12 other blocks underneath where this will give you information. Talk about overwhelming you, it really is. But try to stay focused if you can. But it's hard not to. Heritage Quest online, free for Connecticut residents. A lot of other states have something the same way. Now, my grandfather was born in Poland. No one, and my mother was the youngest of 7 children, but no one in the family knew anything about my grandfather's family other than that his father's name was Jan. Didn't know what his mother's name, even her first name, was. He filled out a Social Security application, okay? There is a way, and he filled it out. He had to write down his mother's name and his father's name. So what I finally did was I went on the Social Security Death Index. In most cases, if somebody died, they will give you their Social Security number. I know, it seems to me like, isn't that the way all these frauds and everything are happening? But I have no idea how they keep track of it. But his Social Security number was there, even though I had it from, I think, his death certificate or whatever. But if I don't have it, going to either Family Search, Ancestry, Heritage Quest will get me to that death index. Now, does that get me the application? Oh no, it's not that easy. I had to write and apply. Of course, it costs money, probably about, I don't know, 25 back then, so I don't know, 105 now. No, I have no idea. I don't think it's gotten that much further. Come on. So I wait too long, see, I can tell when I've talked a lot. I would suggest, don't even worry about that website. If you just look, Social Security card application, that's what you're looking for, it'll get you to the site, because Lord knows it's probably changed since yesterday when I wrote the site number down. But what it did do was, I had Mary Rasmond. Mary Rasmond is my grandmother, and I didn't know that. Have I been able to trace back the Rasmond line? Not a bit. But at least I got one more step, and that was a step I didn't have. So if your relative, and a lot of people, maybe did not apply for Social Security or died before then, but this is a great way of finding some information out. You are very lucky. You've got a wonderful staff here at the library if you come here. I've also been to your town hall, and they were absolutely wonderful there. But here are some of the books that the librarian told me that were her go-to books, kind of, if somebody comes in and is looking for information about Stonington. So, history of the town of Stonington, homes of our ancestors in Stonington, Connecticut, graveyards. There is a site in your resources that I gave you called findagrave.com that everybody thinks is really funny. But I have to tell you that I have found the grave of a relative in Denmark, in upstate New York, And I also volunteer for findagrave.com, and I put in information about stones, and I take pictures of gravestones. My grandchildren just think I'm really weird. But graveyards are terrific if you're looking for some genealogy. This one I had never heard of, and I want to read it. It's called In the Village by Anthony Bailey. Have any of you? Oh, okay. You know all about it.
He's a wonderful character, an Englishman who knew a lot of people here. And
how wonderful.
Writer as well.
Wonderful. Well, it just sounds like, aren't you lucky to have something like that? If you're looking for genealogy in any library, 929s, and Connecticut history, 974s. Also, again, visit that library if you can. So, start your search with yourself. Record the information consistently. Write down the information. Where did it come from? Organize it however you want. Search for those original primary source records, vital records, census, Social Security, church records. We didn't even start talking about those. Military records. And evaluate that information. I got lots of information about all my people. Is it all true? I don't think so. I know I've got to disprove it sometimes. So, thank you very much for coming. I do want to do a call out to Elaine Jones-Hayes from Laramie, Cheyenne, Wyoming. I used some of the resources that she had for the PowerPoint, so I need to make sure I give a shout out to her. So thank you. If anybody has any questions or wants to hang on, I've got some books back on the bookcase.
How can you, sometimes people have asked, how can you protect your dates and your birth dates and some things like that? I don't know. I've never done it.
Protect them from.
Well, when you go online and you're doing.
Oh, yeah. I guess I don't worry that much about those kinds of things. But I certainly, I do have my family tree online. But understand that, like when I go through Family Tree Maker and it puts it online, any living, it only puts the information of people who are dead. Okay? If I don't say they're dead, they're not on there. Or I think after over 100 years or whatever, But yes, sir.
I'm pretty easy because I go back to all the founders of Stonington.
Ooh.
But in Richard Wheeler's book, now do I put in all the children on every, like my grandmother's sisters and brothers, all on the list, or just go to direct descendants?
Well, it depends. I think if you're starting, you want to.
No, I've got a paper. You just got to put it on a chart.
Okay. No, then on a chart, no.
Just the direct.
No, right. But you might want to have a chart that's a little different. That's a family group sheet. Okay.
Like my grandmother and grandfather, first second cousins, and then.
Well, we won't go into that one, but a family group sheet will give you a place to record all of that information. Okay, that's right. So a pedigree chart is a direct line. Okay, but a family group sheet that I might have a copy of to show you will give you a place to write that. Any other questions?
There's one thought that you might have is the point about when you have a direct line going back and you lose track somehow. I haven't lost track. I'm all right. The only point I'm getting at is sometimes the information in your direct line isn't there, and the information on these children of that same parent have better information on them.
You got it right.
I found out it's like in Stonington, the minors. Some are ER, some are OR.
OR.
It's all the same thing.
Yeah. Is the same way with the Wheelers? Does it go to OR at all?
No.
No, probably not. Just where it is in English. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much.